Okay, this is section 2.4. Again, this is review material. And this is a very important concept for you to understand. So if you are weak with factoring, this is definitely one of the sections that you want to watch. Okay, now we're going to factor trinomials in here. Okay, now let me start off by saying you you can always guess when you factor. You can always open up your two binomials and then start plugging numbers in to see if they work. You want to foil them back out to make sure that they work. Okay. Uh, but the larger your numbers become, then the more options you have, and it can get a little tedious. Okay. So, what I'm going to concentrate on is using what's called the AC method. Okay. If you have a trinomial, and if it factors, this will absolutely get it. Okay. Now, the way this works is uh, where the AC method, the A and the C are going to come from your polynomial that has a square, ax squared plus bx plus c. So a times c, that's where we get that from. So the first thing that we do is you multiply a times c together, and then you list all of the factors of those products, and you want to see which set of factors can get you this middle term. Then you assign, throw your signs in where they need to go. Then you rewrite that middle term using those two factors, and then we're going to factor by grouping. So we're back to 2, 3. That's why 2, 3 was very important. And I made a comment in 2, 3 that said, you need to make sure that you know how to do this because you're going to be using it in a future factoring technique. And this is where you're going to use it. Okay. So this example, they walk you through 6 times 10 is 60. Now, I don't worry. They went through all the signs. I never worry about the signs up front. I always do that last. So you list all of the factors and you find which set of factors can get you the middle term and then throw your signs in, replace factor by grouping. Okay, so here we go. So if we look at number one, uh, I'm going to take the first thing I want to look at is do I have a GCF? So 12, 17, and 5? No, no GCF. So I'm going to take 12 times 5. Let me scoot this over. Let me do this in purple. So I'm going to take 12 times 5, and we get 60. Okay, I'm going to list the factors of 60. 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, and then 6 and 10. Now, which sets, which set of factors could get me a 17? Well, if I add or subtract 1 and 60, if I add it, I get a 61. If I subtract it, I get a 59. So that's not it. If I add 20 and 30, I get a 32. If I subtract it, I get a 28. That's not it. If I add it, 3 and 20, I get a 23. If I subtract it, I can get a 17. So maybe. If I add, I get a 19. If I subtract, I get an 11. Nope. If I add, I get a 17. Oh, well, maybe. And if I subtract, I get a 7. If I add, I get a 16. And if I subtract, I get a 4. Okay. So I've got these two factors. Now I need, for these two factors, I need to get a negative 17. Okay. So in order for me to get a negative 17, if it's this, then both of these would have to be negative. Okay. But notice that my last term is negative, And so if this were 12 times -5, then that gets me a -60. So if I multiply two negatives, I get a positive. So this is not going to be it. This is the one that I want, the 3 and the 20. So the 20 has to be negative, the 3 has to be positive. Okay, so that this is going to rewrite my middle term. So I'm going to have 12x squared, and then I'm going to use plus 3x minus 20x. So you can't really tell that this is a different color. Okay, I just went ahead and did it in a different color. Okay, so now we have four terms, and just like we did in section 2-3, I'm going to cut this in half. We're going to factor by grouping, so I can take a 3x out, and I'm left with a 4x plus 1. So the 4x plus 1 has to repeat. So 4x times what gets me a -20? That would be a -5. 1 times what gets me a -5? And that would be a -5. So now we just finish it. We have a 4x plus 1 times 3x minus 5. And that's how this works. Now, again, you can guess if you want. And this one probably wouldn't be too tough if you guess, because 5 only factors one way. It's the 12 that you would have to mess with, okay? All right, so now let's look at number 2. All right, so we're going to take 6 times 6. So that's 36. Let's factor that. So 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9. We get 6 and 6. Okay, now I'm looking to get a 37. Since this polynomial is positive, that means all of my factors have to be positive, which is nice. So that means I just need to add. Well, 6 plus 6 is 12. Nope. 4 and 9, that's 13. Nope. This is 15, 20, 37. Yes. So these both have to be positive. So now we're going to split this up. So we have 6x squared plus x plus 36x plus 6. Cut it in half. Take the GCF out. And then we're left with a 6x plus 1. And I have to take a 6 out of, whoops, I have to take a 6 out of the second grouping. So now we're left with 6x plus 1 times x plus 6. And there you go. Okay. Now number 3, again, first times the last, a times c. So we list all our factors, 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. Okay. Now this ends with a negative. So when it ends with a negative, that means your signs have to be different to get your middle term. If it ends with a positive, then they're going to be the same to get the middle term. So I need to subtract to get a positive 5. Well, if I subtract, I get a 35. If I subtract these, I get a 16. If I subtract this, I get a 9. If I subtract the bottom ones, I get a 0. This is where I get a 5. And so I get a 5 if the 9 is positive and the 4 is negative. Remember, this rewrites our 5x. So we're going to have 6x squared. You want to be careful. Minus 4x sorry guys, minus 4x plus 9x minus 6. Now, it doesn't matter if you put the minus 4x first and the 9x second. You could flip that and put the 9x minus 4x, and it still would work out. Okay, so here we're going to take out a 2x, and we're going to be left with a 3x minus 2. Well, the 3x minus 2 has to repeat. And so 3x times what gets me 9x? That would be a 3. Minus 2 times what gets me a negative 6? That would be a 3. So we have 3x minus 2 times 2x plus 3. Okay. All right. Now, number 4, we start off with a negative term. And remember, we don't like to do that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is factor out that negative. Now, I didn't worry about factoring anything else out because I noticed that for 6 and 25, there is no GCF. Okay. All right. Now, this is not going to be pretty using the AC method because you're going to see that we're going to get a really big number. So let's guess. Okay, so I'm just going to put over here. We're going to guess. And I'm going to guess 2 times. If I don't get it by the second time, then we're going to use the AC method. Okay, so 6a squared. Well, I'm going to try a 2a and a 3a. And then 25, I'm just going to use 5 and 5. Uh-oh, hang on a second. That's plus. That's plus. Okay. All right, so outside gives me a 10a. Inside gives me a 15a. And 10 plus 15 is 25. Since this is a positive polynomial, then it has to be positive everywhere. And so I guessed. I really didn't look at the answer. Okay, I just guessed and I got it on the first time. Some people are great guessers, but that's how you check your answer. Is you want to FOIL this back out to make sure that you get what you started with. Okay, number 5. Let's go ahead and guess on this one. Again, if I don't get it by the second time, I'm going to go to AC method. Now, 5x squared only factors one way. That has to be an x and a 5x. And 9, just because it's a perfect square, I'll do 3 and 3. Now, this ends with a positive sign. So that means my signs have to be the same. And they're both going to have to be negative. So outside gives me a 3. Inside is a 15. 3 and 15 is 18. So how do I get a negative 18 from 3 and 15? They both have to be negative. So we guessed. Again, I did not look at the answers. All right. Okay, so let's look at number 6. Now, be careful because look how the rest of these were degree 2s, but this is a degree 3. And notice what you have in all 3 terms. Okay, so we start off with the negative. So that means I'm going to take at least a negative out. 6, 33, and 63 are all divisible by 3. P to the third, P squared, and P, they all have a P in common. So now I'm going to write what's left. Remember, we took the negative out, so all our signs are going to flip. So 2P squared plus 11P minus 21. Okay. All right. Now, let's see. Do we want to guess or let's go ahead and guess. Okay, so here's the minus 3P. I'm going to open this up. So a P and a 2P and 21. I'm just going to use 3 and 7. Okay. So we end with a negative, which means our signs have to be different. So 7 and 6, when I subtract that, I get a 1, not an 11. Okay, well, that doesn't work. So now I'm going to flip the 3 and the 7. So outside's a 3, inside is a 14. 14 and 3, if I subtract those, I get an 11. So how do I get a positive 11? Well, the 14, which is right here, has to be positive. That one has to be negative. And here we go. That's it. Again, you could have used the AC method. 2 times 21 is 42. List all your factors of 42, split up the middle term, and then go from there. Okay, so it's totally up to you as to how you want to do it, if you want to guess or do something else. Okay, now, perfect square trinomials. So this is where we had the a plus b squared and a minus b squared, what they factor into. And I told you there's a trick that I show um, in lecture, and I'm going to show you what the trick is. Now, notice that the a plus b quantity squared, well, a squared, there's your a squared. And then b squared, there's your b squared. And then your middle term is a 2ab. So ab, but you have 2 of them. So if you took this out of context, well, a times b times 2 is 2ab. Okay, now look at the a minus b squared. A squared is a squared minus b squared. Well, that's minus b times minus b, which is a positive b squared. Now, if I multiply these two together, I get a minus ab times 2 is a minus 2ab. So I'm taking the exponent totally out of context to see if I have a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so here's how this works. Watch. First, you want to be on the lookout for the first and your last terms to see if they are perfect squares. So 25x squared minus 60x plus 36, they are perfect. The first and the last are perfect squares. Now, what do we square to get a 25x squared? That's a 5x. What do I square to get a 36? That would be a 6. Okay, now to check the 2ab, here's a times b and then times 2. So 2 times 5 is 10 times 6 is 60x. I got my middle term back, so that means I take the sign. And that's it. Okay, that's how you check it. All right, let's do another one. Now we have fractions. I'm not going to panic. So 4x squared and 1/9. Well, 4x squared is a perfect square. 1/9 is a perfect square because that would be 1/3 times 1/3. So what do you square to get a 4x squared? That would be a 2x. And then I already told you 1/3 times 1/3. Okay, now we're going to check. A, B, and then I want to double it. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 1 is 4 over 3x. I got my middle term back, so I keep the sign. And that is a perfect square trinomial. Okay. 11. 36x squared, 49. They are both perfect squares. So what do you square to get a 36x squared? That would be a 6x. What do you square to get a 49? That's a 7. So now 2 times A times B. Well, 12 times 7 is an 84x. I got my middle term back, so I grab that sign and it's factored. Okay. Now, number 12, be very careful because it does look like a perfect square trinomial. Okay. But we got to be careful because look at it has something in common. There is a 4 that's common. So this is a 4y squared plus 4y plus 1. Okay. Now, here's your 4. Are your first and last terms perfect squares? And they are. What do you square to get a 4y? Well, that's a 2y. What do you square to get a 1? That's a 1. So now 2 times 2y times 1, that's a 4y. We got our middle term back, so that's a plus. Now, if you didn't do this, then you would have a GCF still stuck inside, and then you would be in trouble. Okay? All right. And then I'm not going to worry about factor by using substitution. We'll worry about this uh, we'll worry about this whenever we get to that part in class. Okay? But that's it for this section.